Hey folks, welcome to day one of Firebase week. In these 5 days, we're going to take Firebase Firestore implementation and put a beautiful REST API in front of it that's ready to be shared with the world, that looks like a REST API should and doesn't have the idiosyncrasies of a storage-based API. We've done a lot of work with the Supabase folks in the past. Our sort of Supabase demos and Supabase integration have been very popular, and so we want to do the same for the Firebase community. Zuplo is an API gateway, so it sits in front of your backend and becomes the new sort of backend for your clients. They can be web clients, they can be people who just want to consume an API, and Zuplo gives your API superpowers. So we're going to use Zuplo in this case to do a few things. Turn a sort of strange, proprietary looking Firestore query-based API into something that feels much more natively REST-based. We're going to add API key authentication to that. We're going to add validation to the bodies and to the requests, and we're going to add developer documentation. And then we're going to show you how to monetize that API. And if we have some time, maybe we'll even throw in some AI magic. So in day one, what I want to do is take a very simple Firestore collection and turn it into a beautiful REST API. And I'm going to fall on that sword of demos that is the to-do list. And we are going to make a to-do list API. And look, I know that's not really a business that you're going to monetize, but hopefully it shows us everything you need to do to know how to take a Firestore collection or series of collections, put a beautiful API in front of it using Zuplo. So let's get started. We're going to go into Zuplo. So you just come to portal.zuplo.com. You can sign up for a free account. We have a pretty generous free tier and a very low cost paid tier. And we're going to create a new project and we're going to call it, let's call it Firebase To Do. Okay. Yeah, I can't believe I'm doing a to-do list again. I thought those days were over, but here we go. And so the project will be ready typically in about 10 seconds. So my gateway is already live, and so that gateway is going to sit in front of my Firestore API. And we're going to add 4 routes today. We're going to do the full CRUD series. We're going to do get all to-dos. We're going to do create to-do. We're going to do update via a patch, and we're going to do delete. So you can delete an API item. And the back end is obviously going to be Firestore. So there's a few things we need to do to get set up. So let's pop over to the console, to my Firestore database, and let's create a new collection. I'm going to call it to-dos. And I'm going to generate an auto ID. And what are we going to have in that? We'll have a description, which is a string, milk. Let's make a shopping list. We're going to have a complete flag, which is Boolean, which can be true. And we're going to have, no, I think that's it for now. I think that's probably enough right now. So let's save that. We've got our field ready. Okay, so there's our first item in the collection. And then we're going to do a get all, so we should be able to get this out of the system. So let's see, what do we need to do now? Well, we need to be able to access this and call it from Zuplo. So I know what the URL looks like for this. That's not too hard. But I need to be able to call it, and I need to set up my security. So I'm going to come in here, and I've set up a web app here. Let's go and look at the settings for this. And the way Zuplo is going to call your backend is using a service JSON and a thing we have called an upstream notification. So I need to go and set up that service account. Now this is going to take me out of this area here and send me off this way to my Google Cloud account. Here you can see I have my account here, Fireman Admin SDK, and I need to come in here, create keys. I'm going to create a new key, service JSON. Boom, and that has downloaded me a piece of JSON that I will need shortly. So I'm gonna take that right now, put it over here, and I'll paste it in a little bit later when we're ready. So that's gonna give me the credentials for Zuplo, which we're gonna do different authentication on Zuplo. That's gonna give me the credentials to call Firestore from Zuplo, and then I can do different auth on the front. That's called trusted subsystem. It's quite a common pattern. So let's come in and start creating some routes. So we go to this file here in Zuplo called routes.oas.json. OAS stands for Open API Specification. If you're familiar with REST APIs, you'll know that the industry standard way of doing REST APIs is using Open API to document them and specify them. And that's what we use at Zuplo. So I'm going to add a route here. We're going to call it get all to-dos. And we're going to add some versioning and call it to-dos and leave it as a get. And we want to support cores because we might want to support web clients for this. And the route itself is going to be a get, and we're going to do a URL rewrite to, I'm going to paste this in here, to this URL. So let's take a look at this. So what this is the full URL with a special marker that says, hey, plug in the project ID here. Plug in the project ID of your Supabase project, and then it goes to documents, run query. So we'll have to send a body to this. So what normally happens in Zuplo is a request comes in and it's forwarded to this backend, but we're going to have to make some changes. So we're gonna actually, as the request comes in, we're going to change the request that is sent to the Firestore backend to make it compatible with Firestore. But if you're getting stuff, you really should do a get, right? But we want to do a query, and a query in Firestore is a post. So it's kind of weird. So we want to make it look canonical and normal. So we're going to do that right now. So let's do a couple of things here. Let's set up the project ID. So I go over to environment variables. That's trying to read an environment variable there. So settings, environment variables. Let's add one called project ID. And it doesn't need to be a secret, but I can come over here and get my project ID. There it is. Beautiful. Thank you. And paste that in. Oh, I have a new line in there I don't want. Click save, and then I've got my project ID. And the other thing I'm going to do is set my service account JSON. Actually, let's put that in right now. So I'm going to call this variable service account JSON. I'm going to mark it as a secret because this is a secret. It means people can't get it back out of the environment variable system in this UI, which we don't want. Let's get rid of that new line. Hit save. And there is our service account JSON. No, I can't see it because it's a secret. So we're all ready to do some magic here. Okay, so let's go back over to my code, to my get all to-dos here. And I think we can actually start testing this and see what happens. So let me save my changes. That will be ready in about 5 to 10 seconds typically. And then we have a cute little test console here that allows me to test my API. This is actually live on that URL. And I got the error. This error came back from Firebase. So I made a GET request and Firebase rejected it saying, well, 403, like, what are you doing? Well, if we're getting some sort of missing or insufficient permissions or permission denied, it's probably because we're not sending the right information over. Well, actually, there's a few problems. We're sending the request over all wrong. The request that goes to Firestore to do this query, to do this sort of run query piece here, actually needs to be a post. So we need to change the way the request looks to be a post with a body to actually query this information. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a policy in our request pipeline here. That policy is going to modify the request. It's going to turn it into a post and add a post body. It's going to feel magical because the front of this API looks canonical. The URL looks simple. I just do a get on this and I get, and I get my to-dos out. But actually what the Zuplo in the background is going to do is turn that into a post and add some body to that. So let's go and make that change. So I'm going to do that by adding a new inbound policy, which is going to say set query body is going to be the name of it. And the code for this is relatively simple, actually. We don't need any options, so I can delete that. I'm going to set this. This is TypeScript or JavaScript, so it's pretty easy. Don't need these comments. And the way this works is I can return the original request, which means continue, or I can change the request in some way. So let's actually build up a query. So this is what a query looks like in Firebase. I've got one ready over here. And this is very simple. Basically says, this is where I want the query to go. I'm just going to get to-dos, and I'm not going to add any workflows. I'm just going to get all of the to-dos. We will add a workflows to this in part 2, in day 2's video, because we're going to add user ownership of to-do items so that I can't see and update everyone's to-dos. I should only be able to update my own, right? So we're going to add that. And then we're going to write some code. Const nr equals new Zuplo request. So we're creating a new request. I'm going to base that on the last request, but I'm going to change a few things. So I'm going to say the body is JSON.stringify. Remember, we didn't have a body before because it was a GET request. That is the JSON stringification of that query. And the method is now going to be post. And we're going to return that new request. So we've taken the original request and we're modifying it. And now we're going to apply this in our pipeline here. Custom code inbound, set, query, body, and we don't need these options. Let's give this a nice name, set, query, body, click OK, and save that. And so if I've written that correctly, what will now be happening is we'll be hitting the correct URL. Pretty sure I'm hitting the correct URL because of the project ID. In fact, I'll show you how you can test that. So let's have a look, test. Boom, I still get a 403. I expect that because I haven't set any permissions on it. But if we look at the logs, what you'll see is here, we are rewriting to, and notice how it inserted my project ID. So we're writing to the same place, but we're getting a 403. I'll tell you why that is. It's because we're not setting the authorization header. So we actually have a policy built in for Firebase users that sets the upstream token, what we call upstream. So this is a policy, a bit like the one I just did, that actually uses the service account JSON from the environment variable and generates a JOT token to call the backend with. So I'm just going to drop that in. And if I hit save, fingers crossed, if I didn't mess anything up, we should actually see some data coming back out of, wow, look at that. We actually have data coming back. Description, milk, Boolean value, true. So we have just made a simple get API. Actually, let me show, I'll just show you this in the browser. Look at that. I'm just hitting it with a browser and I'm getting data out. Now it's insecure, it's unsecured right now, but we're going to add security. We're going to add API key auth in day one. That'll come tomorrow. So that's pretty cool. Now, the one thing that doesn't feel very canonical about this is this very strange format of this message. It looks really weird. It's just the way Firestore works. So what we want to do is write a generic component, which we may actually turn into something we ship with Zuplo, but I'm just going to give you the code right here and put it in a repo so you can use it, that inspects this document and turns it into a much more canonical REST API. And that's going to be an outbound policy. So this outbound policy is going to intercept the response that we're about to send to the client and say, you know what, let's make this look like JSON and not look like this wacky sort of document store. So we're going to call that Firestore response to JSON as an outbound policy. As an outbound policy, and I've already got the code here, so I'm just going to cut and paste this in. This will all be posted on GitHub and on the blog, etc., so you can take this code yourself. And then I'm going to come over here and add this policy as a custom code policy. And there are some options on this policy actually that we created. So essentially you can say, what do you want the document ID to be? And I'm going to just make it ID. I think that looks prettier. So it's going to add an ID that is the ID of the document in Firestore as a simple property in JSON. So let's click OK. Let's save that. And that'll be deployed in just a few seconds. Yep, now let's test it. And boom, look at that. We now get an array that looks readable, that looks like a real API. And we've done that in like just a few minutes. So that's pretty cool, I think, actually. So there we go. So that is our get API done pretty quickly. Now, if we could do a get, we want to be able to do a create. So let's go and look at adding a create endpoint. So I'm going to add a new route here. I'm going to call this create to do, and it'll be on /v1/todos. The canonical way of doing a REST-ish API or REST API is to post to a collection, to post to a plurality of resources like to-dos. And let's enable cause. And I need to make this post because a post is typically how you create things. So what do we need to do here? Well, we're going to need to add that upstream auth policy again so that we hit Firestore on the back end. And this time, the URL I'm going to hit here is just slightly different. It doesn't call run query, but it's going to look familiar to you. And we're going to do a URL rewrite to the same thing with the project ID, but now we go to documents, to-dos, basically. So pretty straightforward. Now, one of the things I want to do here is I want to post a body that looks sensible. But again, the way that Firestore works is it wants this kind of, I think fairly ugly, honestly, format that I don't want to deal with. I don't want my users of my API to deal with. So I'm going to write another simple custom policy that's an inbound policy called JSON to Firestore request. That's the reverse of the other one we wrote. And I've got the code here, JSON to Firestore request. Let's copy that, paste that in. And what that will do is take a normal JSON body and turn it into what a Firestore expects. So let's add this policy in here, add policy, custom code, JSON to Firestore request. And there are no options on this. Click OK. So that's, let's rename this so we know what it is. So JSON to Firestore makes it easier to read. Actually, I want to fix that one here as well. Yeah, let's change that to Firestore to JSON. It just makes looking at your APIs a little bit easier to remember what these different policies do. So we've got JSON to Firestore ready there. Is there anything else I need to do? I don't think so at this point. There's no options. We've got the authentication set up. So I think we're good. So let's save that. This would be pretty amazing, right? If we've just created this quickly, an API that can create and read to-dos that looks and feels like a beautiful REST API, but it's actually backed by Firestore. So let's test this. So to-dos, we're doing a post. So I need a body, and you typically don't provide an ID, but we will provide a description. Let's get some bread this time. And then we should have complete is false because we have not done it. Let's test that. Wow, we just got a response that actually looks pretty good. It's a weird Firestore document again, so I don't like that very much. So let's go and test it and see if we actually can get that back now. Look at that, there's our bread. We just created it. That is in our Firestore, and we can see it if we go to Firestore database here. You'll see we have a couple of documents now, true, milk and bread. We just created that. How awesome is that? How quick was that? Again, we want the response to look a little bit more REST-ish. So on this create method, I'm going to reuse our Firestore to JSON. That will take the Firestore format and turn it back into pretty JSON. So let's save that change. That'll take just a couple of seconds to deploy. And I don't want to create bread this time. So what else can go on a shopping list? We did milk. Let's get some crackers. How British. And test that. And now we get a much nicer looking JSON response. So I feel proud. I feel proud about how beautiful our API is. You know, I post a to-dos, I post a simple body, and I get back a simple JSON document. All in a matter of minutes. So let's keep going. We're making good progress. Okay, it's time to do, what should we do next? Should we do update? So yeah, let's do update. So we'll do update to do. So that's going to be a little different. /v1/to-dos. And typically when you update, you're doing a patch and you're doing it to a specific document ID. So I need this to-do ID here that indicates to Zoopla that that is a parameter that I might want to use. So what do we want to do in here? Well, once again, we need that authentication so that we call Firestore with the auth. And then I need JSON to Firestore to convert nice JSON into Firestore JSON. And obviously we want to do the Firestore to JSON back, and it needs to be a patch, and it's a URL rewrite again to the same URL we had for the to-do items, with one difference here. If you want to do a nice clean patch, then you typically do this thing called update masking on Firestore. So that says don't overwrite fields that aren't specified, only change the fields that are specified. So that means if we want to change the description, we just send the description with the ID, and that will work. So we've just set update maths to description and complete, which are the two fields that we care about here. And I think that's literally all we need to do. So first thing though I need to go and let's save this a second. You can't test it whilst you have unsaved changes because we don't want to confuse you. I'm going to get that, and I'm going to grab this ID for milk. Let's remember that. And we're going to change milk. So we've got bread and crackers. We're going to change milk to be something else. So I'm going to test this. I replace that with the ID, and then we're going to say description, almond milk. Let's be specific here. Is this going to be my first demo fail? Let's see. We're making a lot of changes here. Look at that. It looks like it worked. So if I go to Firestore now, and you could actually see it's changed. Almond milk. So we just wrote an update function for a beautiful REST API. It's doing all of the right things in a matter of minutes. Now let's just finish the quad and do delete. So delete to do /v1/todos to do ID again, because you specify ID. We should use delete because we're building a sort of fairly canonical REST API. And I think all we need here now is the upstream authentication. We need to do a URL rewrite. And this is going to be a little different because it will actually have the to-do ID on the end, just like it did for patch. So we actually have the to-do ID being read from the parameters. So it's taking this and pushing it onto the end of that URL there. So I think it's time to save that. And then I'm just gonna, let's save it. Let's go and grab that URL here. Come back to delete. Let's test this. We don't need a body here. Is it gonna work? I got nothing back. That looks pretty good. I've only got 2 items. I've only got crackers and bread. In that short amount of time, we just built a pretty beautiful canonical REST API that I would feel comfortable shipping to customers, almost, with a few things we've got to do in the rest of the week, that works over Firestore. How slick is that? Come back. Day 2, we're going to add authentication. You don't want anybody calling this API. You don't want to share your to-do items with other people. So what we're going to do in tomorrow's video is we're actually going to add API key authentication so that users can come along, they can get an API key, they can call the API, and when they create a document now, it'll be marked with their user ID so that we know it's them, and they can only update their own, they can only delete their own, they can only see their own, and when they create them, they're tagged as theirs. So come back for that. We got a lot more in store for Firebase Week. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm all lit up.